the archive. And tonight, my humble suggestion would be to cover some of the most important topics that this political novel produced by Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky is revealing. And as I said, you have to bear in mind that he produced this book in 1871, maybe a year after the great shock produced by the killing of Ivan Ivanov, who was, as you will remember, a member of the revolutionary group led by Sergei Neachaev in the late 60s. So we are witnessing a radicalization of Russian society, perhaps due to the fact that Tsar Alexander II was rather late in implementing the necessary reforms which Russia long needed. And probably it's also important for us, as we speak about Russia, 19th century Russia, and about imperial Russia, to say that despite the fact that Russian culture has absorbed a lot from the West in terms of producing beautiful works of art, monuments, architectural pieces which are truly astounding, like the Winter Palace in St. Petersburg. Apart from the fact that Russian culture has produced wonderful musicians and composers such as Tchaikovsky or perhaps Rachmaninoff at the end of the 19th century, not to mention, perhaps Shostakovich in the 20th century, Russia was not able to implement the institutional reforms which were very much, as I said, needed in the 19th century. If you draw a comparison between Russia in the 19th century and any Western European country, you would be shocked to figure out what was the reality in this huge empire. And the reality, as you probably know from reading any history of 19th century Russia, is truly gruesome. When you think about perhaps the relationship between the sovereign, and that is the Tsar, and the aristocracy. Maybe you know the concept of patrimonialism, which has been largely used by Max Weber and by a great historian of Russia, Richard Pipes. Patrimonialism means that the sovereign, that is the emperor, is the owner of the land and of the people. Let me recapitulate for you. The owner of the land of all Russia and the owner of the people is the Tsar, and he perhaps can be seen as somebody who can delegate the exercise of ownership over the land to the aristocracy. But at the end of the day, the only owner, as I said, is the Tsar. Then what else do you have? You have the obligation on behalf of the serfs, and there were like hundreds of thousands of serfs in Russia in the 19th century. Their obligation towards the sovereign was to spend up to 2 months every year doing the hard labor which was necessary on the land, so that the agricultural production would give those families, aristocratic families, the means to enjoy a luxurious life. So we are in the 19th century Russia seeing some important reforms lagging behind. And one of the intellectuals who got very much upset with the Tsar Nicholas I, as you remember, was Fyodor Mikhailovich himself. Dostoevsky was part of the Petrashevsky circle. In 1949, he was sentenced to death just because he had the courage, the temerity to go against this institution, serfdom, which was hateful to him for Christian reasons and for, I would say, humane reasons as well. So we are in the second part of 19th century Russia, looking at the new phenomenon, political phenomenon, which is, as I said, the advent of revolutionary, I would say, sects or political parties that simply cannot take the legacy of the Romanovs and simply cannot accept the famous slogan which was put forward by Nicholas I. Remember that we've talked about that sentence: autocracy, orthodoxy, and nationality, narodnost. That was the slogan which basically condemned this very important author, Pyotr Chadaev. He was the author of the six letters in which he indicted very much the Russian society for its incapacity to be competitive, to be basically European. So we are in the middle of this controversy. The reforms are very much necessary for Russia to go forward and then to become even competitive. But on the other hand, some people like Sergei Neachaev are very keen to implement those reforms in a radical fashion. So that Neachaev is, I would say, a nihilist who inflamed the youth of his generation, and in the name of the revolution, he was keen to ask any comrade, any member of the political party he was leading, to give up on their natural affection and basically to live a new life. We are witnessing, as I said, the advent not just of a new ideology, which is called the revolution, but also the advent of the new man. The new man, a new type of human being who does not believe in God necessarily, but who believes in the power of political agents such as the Communist Party to fundamentally transform human history. So instead of God, you have history with capital H, and you have a new attitude towards the creation, I would say, of God, and that is described by a sense of disgust and a sense of revolt. So let's look at the three features which Alain Besançon, the French philosopher, was very, very good at pointing out, the 3 or 4 important features of this revolutionary community, which is very well described in The Demons. The first attitude of those revolutionaries, including Neachaev, perhaps Bakunin, Karl Marx for sure, and then later on in the novel Verkhovensky Jr., together with Stavrogin, the first attitude of those Russian revolutionaries was described by a fundamental disgust or revolt towards the divine creation. They simply thought that what they were able to discover in the world, what they were able to see in their own daily lives, was fundamentally corrupt. So while in the book of Genesis we all discover that famous sentence that the world created by God is good, they thought just the opposite. Unlike the Abrahamic traditions, they thought that the world is intrinsically bad, intrinsically corrupt, which needs, of course, mending, which needs to be properly improved. And the only way one could improve the world, the historical experience of the world, would be through a collective hatred towards the current status quo. So you have a spirit of destruction praised by Mikhail Bakunin, as well as by Sergei Neachaev, the spirit of destruction, they would call it perhaps creative destruction, which defines the new ethos of the younger generation. So it's, as I said, a revolt against God's creation. It's the hatred towards the sovereign and the status quo. Then it's the abolition of traditional morality, which would typically tell you not to kill, not to steal, And in the name of the revolutionary fight for the emergence of a new era, these revolutionaries would say, give up on traditional ethic, forget about Moses and the 10 commandments. We don't need that. Let's just focus on our final destination, our final goal, which would be, of course, the liberation of all people from their condition, from their social condition of exploitation, and of course, the promise of perfect equality among the members of the new society. In the name of that fight, in the name of that fight, one can, of course, steal, one can, of course, kill, and that's what we are going to see in the demons. The fourth element, which very much describes, as I said, the new ethos, the philosophical convictions of these new men, these revolutionaries, the fourth element is that man is devoid of freedom, of individual freedom. Man is just the victim of various economic and societal forces. And of course, in particular, the Western man is the victim of capitalism. There is no moral consciousness. There is no individual consciousness. A human being must be seen always as part of a collective mechanism. And that force of the collective is basically destroying the sense of individuality, which was emphasized ever since the Renaissance. So we are seeing the emergence of a new ideology, which is trying to replace, I would say, traditional Christianity. And this ideology is shaping the revolutionary project in such a way that people can spend their entire life thinking about ways in which they could bring about, as I said, a new reality, a new kingdom. Basically, they were thinking about bringing back the lost paradise through economic and political means. Now, as you know, Tsar Nikolai II was aware of this new danger. And this, despite the fact that he was keen to implement his own reforms in the 19th century Russia, the nihilists, the revolutionaries, were bent on killing him and destroying any, as I said, any remnant of the Romanov family. So in this context, we see The Possessed, this book, wonderful book, the most powerful political book by Fyodor Mikhailovich Dostoevsky, written as a satire, as a pamphlet, but also as I would say, as a prophetic document, which announces the appearance of the Bolshevik Revolution 40 years before 1917. It's a tragic poem about the spiritual ills which are afflicting a godless culture. Of course, all these revolutionaries did not believe in God. They thought they have nothing to learn from the great spiritual masters of Optina Pustin, of any other monastic tradition. They thought somebody like Ava Zosima, Father Zosima, or somebody like Bishop Tihon had nothing to offer. And in this new context, shaped by radical atheism, you see the emergence, as I said, of very powerful conflicts. On the one hand, as you will remember, we have the representatives of the liberal Russian tradition. In the 1940s, the liberals were people such as Stepan Trofimovich, who believed in a gradual transformation of Russia. They typically were either aristocrats or university professors, or sometimes they were just bureaucrats, and they were speaking in an impeccable way French. They had excellent manners. They were very well trained. They were properly educated in some Western institutions. they had a huge admiration for Germany and for France in particular. As I said, they were very good. These liberals were very good in terms of adopting the superficial elements of Western culture. They were good at spending a lot of time with Shakespeare. They were very much in love, just like Stepan Trofimovich, with the classics of Western literature. However, they were not able to implement the very institutions of the West, which are still today, I would say, accountable for the great advances of the Western civilization. And when I speak about these institutions, let me ask you this time, what do you think are the foundation institutions for the West? When we talk about the great advantage of Western civilization vis-a-vis any other civilization, what do you think are the most critical institutions that make a difference up until now, or which have made a difference up until now? You go to Russia, you'll find a splendid piece of architecture in the heart of St. Petersburg. That's fine. You go to Moscow, you'll see the Tretiakov Gallery, which is a wonderful museum. No problem. You go to Russia, in the evening, you go to the ballet, perhaps exhibition or concert. You go to a beautiful cultural event, and you cannot see any difference between the West and Russia. However, there is something absent. What do you think is the most important element missing from Russian society by, say, 1862, 1865? Let me walk you through these institutions.
The parliament.
What about the parliament? What is the parliament? What is the parliament, if I may ask you? It's the institution in charge with
The representation of
the people. So just pay attention to this very concept. Representation. In America, in 1776, you had an entire generation of people, including George Washington, John Adams, and of course, many others. They were keen to wage a war against Great Britain in the name of one philosophical statement: no taxation without representation. Okay, so Benjamin Franklin truly believed in that. Alexander Hamilton truly believed in that, not to mention Thomas Jefferson and the rest. What does it mean to be represented? Let's make one step further. To be represented in the parliament, that means to have a voice, to be part of a contract. You as the citizen decide every 4 years to delegate your interest to somebody else. And that's your MP. That is the member of the parliament. Now, this institution, the parliament, is not necessarily something modern. You see a quasi-parliament in the Roman Senate. In the times of Julius Caesar, the people could go and speak to one senator about their daily worries, about their daily business. And if there was a law which had to be passed, they would talk about that specific law. There was this to and fro movement. I complain and you fix it. I pay you because you are my MP, member of parliament, and I pay you because that's my job, and you go and fix the problem. So that very notion of being represented just didn't exist in Russia. Let's see another institution which is critical. What about free press? What about the capacity for various intellectuals to critique the establishment, the church, to critique not the church as such as the body of Christ? I'm not talking about that, but the church corruption. What about the possibility of critiquing the abuses of power made in the name of the people, but by various bureaucrats? What about the possibility of critiquing the human failings of, say, a royal family member that was just unacceptable? It was impossible in those days to say anything bad about, say, somebody like Tsar Nikolai II. I'm talking here about early 20th century. It was almost impossible to critique somebody like Tsar Alexander II. So that is the suffocating context in which various writers have to engage with the social problem of Russia. So we have the parliament, we have the free press. What else? Property, ownership. It was very difficult to make a solid promise when you were, say, the owner of a piece of land. It was very difficult to make a solid promise that that land can go to somebody else, because the Tsar or somebody next to the emperor could trigger an interest in that very property, and you could basically be dispossessed through a fiat. So that's another important institution. Let's move on. Give me another example of a strong institution. Has anybody heard about the Russian Constitution? Were the Russian intellectuals spending a lot of time trying to write about the Constitution? Do you see any great thinker in 19th century Russia talking about first article of the Constitution, second article of the Constitution? No, not at all. While in America you have many thinkers, many philosophers, legal thinkers, and politicians alike, spending a lot of time writing the Federalist Papers, for instance. There is nothing similar happening in Russia. Why? Because we have no Duma, so we have no parliament, and in essence, we have no constitution, which in principle should limit the power of the sovereign. So you have pretty much an absolutist monarchy, which tells you that the emperor could just sentence to death somebody without any explanation, or could pardon that very person, that very convict, because of his mercy. So we have an interesting development here, and Dostoevsky was very much aware of it. What else is missing from the Western, from the Russian society, if compared to the Western civilization? The free exchange of goods. It's called capitalism. In the absence of ownership of property rights, there is very little room for a proper free market, for a proper capitalist arrangement of private economy. So in that context, people are doomed to be poor. People are simply condemned to a state of the despondency, I would say, and dependency, addiction, sometimes to public money, sometimes to just, I would say, the mercy of the Tsar. In essence, the notion of economic freedom was certainly absent. So we are in a situation which is very different from the West. You have, on the one hand, the rise of socialist ideology in Russia. You have the appearance of nihilism, which means our moral actions should have no ground. I should never try to give a certain metaphysical foundation to my action. You have the spread of utilitarianism, of atheism, of radical politics, and then on the other hand, you have the heirs of Christianity, of Orthodox Christianity. The novel we are talking about tonight is composed of 3 parts. The first part deals, as I said, with the liberals, the older generation. Once again, the main character is called Stepan Trofimovich. He is somebody who fails to become a reformist or reformer. He accepts the religion of comfort. He's just happy to host literary events in his villa, and he doesn't achieve much in his life. So by the time he gets to be 60 years old, he has a sense of failure, of existential failure, which makes him very, very unhappy about his own situation, about his own life, and about his son, who happens to be a member of the revolutionary sect, as I said, which was built around this figure called Stavrogin, and the son has the name of Pyotr Stepanovich. So there you go. You are in a situation in which your life has no meaning, but the only meaning which could be ascribed or assigned to your life, which could come from your own son, that meaning is simply absent, because your own son has no faith in the goodness of God's creation, has no faith in God, and your son is happy to basically destroy everything that you and your own ancestors have built so far. This is part 1, the conflict between the liberals and the radicals. Then you have part 2, in which Piotr or Peter is establishing his close relationship with this prince called Stavrogin. And then you have part 3, in which the climax includes a reference to death, the death of Shatov, the murder, and then the suicide of Kirillov. So it's a tragic story of one member of this group, of this society, of this secret society called Shatov, who initially was a socialist, but who decides at some point to give up on his former collectivist philosophy, and because he's not in line with the revolutionary ideals, somebody, and that is Stavrogin, together with Piotr Verkhovensky Jr., the two decide simply to kill Shatov. And then, of course, something tragic happens when the provincial town is witnessing several murders, and chaos basically gets to control the entire atmosphere. And then you have, of course, the moral questions and the existential dilemma, which is puzzling pretty much all the members of this revolutionary sect. How are we going to respond to any accusation from the outside? How are we going to explain the fact that we have used our power in order to assassinate, to kill somebody who was a member of our group and who now basically wants to become a good Christian? That's the situation. That's the tragedy of Shatov. So as I said, Stepan Verkhovensky, the intellectual, is a tutor of this mysterious prince called Prince Stavrogin, Nicholas Stavrogin. And because he doesn't really believe in God, and I'm talking here about the liberal Verkhovensky, because he's not able to talk to Stavrogin about the temptations which are specific to any young person, he is simply leaving this new generation in a fatherless condition. Nicholas Stavrogin spends a lot of time in the West, and here we see Dostoevsky showing that Europe, secularized Europe, was not very much able to provide spiritual food for this younger generation. He comes back to Russia after various sundry affairs with local women. He has a lot of sins to atone for. This is Stavrogin, the nihilist. But of course, because he has a powerful intellect, Stavrogin, just like, I would say, Ivan Karamazov, he manages to attract alienated or estranged young students such as Piotr Verkhovensky. They both get involved in radical politics. They plan to build a socialist utopia. When Shatov wishes to leave the group, they take it as a personal act of betrayal. So Shatov has to be punished only because he's not able to serve the cause, the ideological purpose of the group. And while Shatov is making closer moves towards embracing his wife, because his wife was for a certain amount of time alone and presumably involved emotionally and even sexually with Nikolai Stavrogin himself. When Shatov decides to go back to his family to reconcile himself with his wife, when Shatov discovers that basically his wife is pregnant and he will become a father, Shatov gets to be, as I said, killed. Now, Kirillov is another interesting character who thinks that since God does not exist, since God is dead, his own humanity must be deified, must be godlike. And there's no way you can show your godlike authority in the world unless you perform a suicidal act, unless you commit a suicide in order to prove others that you are truly the sovereign. So Kirillov is committing suicide. Peter plots a political revolution, and you have a kind of socialist frenzy around this new international. Once again, remember, we are in the days when Karl Marx and Mikhail Bakunin were disputing how to build this international movement of the proletariat. And then you see all these manipulations, accusations, which are leading to a total, I would say, chaos and then destruction of the group they wanted to create in the first place. So that's why Dostoevsky starts his novel by invoking that famous passage in which Christ goes to basically clean, and the word would be exercise, an ill man. And once he decides to do that, Jesus is ready to throw that legion of demons which existed in that ill person into the swines, into the herd of swines, which go basically straight into the abyss and commit suicide, so to speak. And that metaphor, which is very biblical, which is indicating that Dostoevsky himself believed that there is such a thing called demonic possession. That metaphor tells us that Russia was the victim of a demonic attack. Okay? Kirillov commits suicide physically in order to show that he is truly autonomous, that he is truly devoid of fear. By killing himself, Kirillov hopes to liberate mankind or humankind from the curse of fear by showing his will. It's the triumph of the will, so to speak. Then Stepan Trofimovich, the old liberal, falls ill and discovers that basically his legacy is very much corrupt, or has been corrupted by this new ideology. When he gets ill, he finds a very simple woman in a Russian inn. This woman called Sophia nurses him. She was making some money by selling Bibles to various churches and monasteries around the chateau where Stepan Trofimovich was pretty much confined. And just before Stepan Trofimovich, that's the father, passes away, he's listening to a story from the Gospel of Luke, the one in which the devils possess the swine herd and then they go into the sea. Jesus casts several devils that are possessing men into nearby pigs, just as Jesus would exercise the new generation of intellectuals in Russia and would try to cure them from the ills of atheistic, materialistic, and nihilistic ideologies. After the murder, Peter leaves this mysterious town. The conspirators are arrested and they make their confession. However, the l'éminence grise, so to speak, the strategist, the visionary of this conspiratorial group called Nicholas Stavrogin, does not confess. Though he has the chance to open up and speak in front of Bishop Tikhon about the sins of his youth, Nicholas Stavrogin is full of pride and avoids confessing his sins, only in order to return home, where he hangs himself. So you have the second suicide taking place. You have Kirillov, who commits suicide because he is deluded and he wants to prove in front of others how strong he is in face of fear. And then you have, I would say, a suicide committed in the name of spiritual despair or despondency. The sin of hopelessness is what gets Stavrogin, so he commits suicide in that autumn of 1869. The story is sad, but it's sometimes also comical because of the conversations which are taking place. Dostoevsky is very good at showing how destructive some political ideologies can be. At the beginning, those ideologies, those false promises, those philosophical concepts, such as equality, such as social justice, those concepts can be very attractive. But once man divorces himself, or a woman divorces herself from God, the devils are very close to his or to her heart. And so, as you can expect, Dostoevsky believes only Christ can save somebody, can save any person, can save Russia by and large. I would stop here with the presentation because I think I've said enough, and now I'm more than willing to take up questions and perhaps discuss not just the novel itself by Dostoevsky, but also the current situation, if you're interested. Because, by the way, part of the reason why we are witnessing the tragedy in Eastern Europe, the tragedy of war, part of the reason why the current president of Russia started a war against Ukraine, I think has something to do with the cultural convictions, with the philosophical, with the deep political and philosophical convictions of millions of Russians who still regard the West as the enemy, who still do not think that the West has anything to offer. So in the light of these contrasts, which are tragic because they are leading right now as we speak to lots of killings and to human destruction, in the light of this tragic conflict, I would say, between Russia and the West, we can analyze Dostoevsky and still discover the very prophetic content of his writing. Thank you very much. And now the floor is yours. Who would like to make a comment, to discuss anything that we've touched upon?
I would like to address you a question, if I may.
Please, George, please do.
Is there any possibility that the actual strategic action that Putin is making to be something that covers the context we are talking about in Dostoevsky's books, more precisely in the demons?
Clearly, there are many things which Putin believes and which can be found in the book itself. Now, one of the powerful convictions of Vladimir Vladimirovich Putin is that the West has nothing to teach Russia. So there is, I would say, the disease of resentment, which controls Vladimir Putin's mind. Resentment is the enemy of admiration. You cannot learn anything if you despise that person. You cannot learn from anybody if you despise or hate that person. So the first lesson I would draw from the current confrontation is, as I said, the psychological lesson. Russia knows it's backwarded. Russia knows it has no economic power in opposition to the West. Russia knows it does not display any kind of attraction for the youth. It doesn't exercise any sort of magnetism. Nobody wants to go to Russia. Nobody wants to spend a lot of time in Russia. They might want to visit Russia for 10 days in order to see the museums, maybe to listen to some beautiful music, maybe eat some food, but they never want to stay in Russia. And because of that complex of inferiority, which the Russians still have towards the West, Putin has to show some extra power in a different realm. That's not the, as I said, institutional aspect. It's not the economic aspect. It's simply the military power that he can project. And more specifically, it's the nuclear power he can project. So that's the only thing he has, I would say, in his control right now, which can make the West fearful. So the one lesson I would draw from the book is that resentment is powerful on the one hand, and resentful is blinding on the other hand. I hope one can say that in English. Okay, so you become blind when you are resentful. You cannot learn anything. And these intellectuals, they are blind in their hatred for their fathers, in their hatred for their own land, in their hatred against, or for the, I would say, for the spiritual legacy, the spiritual Christian legacy of traditional Russia. And since they are blind and since they are resentful, they can only build on that. And Dostoevsky tells you that whatever you want to build, if you build on resentment, anger, and hatred, that's not going to last. Another element from, say, Putin's experience of life on the one hand, and say Piotr Verkhovensky. The critical word in Verkhovensky's junior speeches is submission. You have to obey. If you want to be part of the political group, if you want to be part of the power of the power structure, if you want to be part of the inner circle, the most important virtue you want to display is obedience. You do not want to critique the leader. You do not want to express candid feelings. You do not want to ask embarrassing questions, like questions pertaining to Stavrogin's past. Stavrogin has committed lots of sin when he was young, sins in his youth. Probably some people suggest he was even guilty of pedophilia. Okay? Now, when he comes back from the West to Russia, he wants to show that he's the true leader. And so he's hiding all that. So there's no question that he can accept from anybody which would scrutinize or which would reveal his sense of failure. So Stavrogin needs a lackey. A lackey means a slavish disciple, lacheu in Romanian, okay, a lackey. And that lackey is Verkhovensky Jr. So you have Stavrogin, and then you have Verkhovensky Jr. Just as you have Ivan Karamazov, or Karamazov, as they say, and Smerdyakov. So in the other novel called Brothers Karamazov, you have the same kind of relationship between the master and the slave. The master is the leader of the group. In the demons, you have Stavrogin, who has a disciple. His prime disciple is Verkhovensky Jr. And he says, Verkhovensky says, you are the sun and I am a worm. I'm the worm. Without you, my life has no meaning. I would be just like Christopher Columbus without America. Without you, I would be like Christopher Columbus without America. So that's called idolatry. So the sin of Verkhovensky, and I would say the sin of the revolutionary sect, be it Bolshevik, communist, socialist, or nationalist, the very sin, the very, I would say, spiritual disease of the group, it's called idolatry. They are worshiping not God, but the leader, in this case, Stavrogin. What does Putin want from his I would say from his inner circle? Have you seen the pictures with Putin talking to the head of the intelligent services, not the KGB, not the FBS, but it's called the intelligence community. There's a famous public shaming which took place like 5 days ago. So you have Vladimir Putin talking to the head of the intelligence in Russia, and at some point Putin just wants to humiliate his, so to speak, disciple, and he does that publicly. You just have to check it out. So what does Putin want? Total obedience, idolatry towards himself. He is the leader. He doesn't want to be challenged. What else? He wants secrecy. Okay, he wants secrecy. You can put it down. Secrecy means power. What we say, what we do should stay with us, should stay here. What else? What else is he doing? He's sealing the bond with the blood of the innocents, with the blood of the innocent people. So Putin is sealing the bond among the comrades, okay, among the members of the inner circle, by asking them to be part of an ideological crime. You have to kill, and then you'll be united. This is the power of Dostoevsky. You know, in 1869, to know that the Bolsheviks would first kill, and because of the innocent blood shed in the revolutionary activities, or throughout the revolutionary activities of 1917, 1918, Trotsky, Lenin, and Stalin would be bound to work together, just to intimate that, just to be able to prophesy that, to anticipate that. It's quite extraordinary. Putin has killed Anna Politkovskaya, the dissident, in 2006. One should double check that. It was the 6th of October, 2006, when a dissident like Shatov gets to be killed. Now, it's not Shatov, it's Anna Politkovskaya. She gets to be killed. Why? Because she changed her mind. Because she didn't see Putin as the savior of Russia. And so she's found dead. Her body is found dead in her apartment. And when you ask Putin, why was this great journalist killed? He says, I have no idea what you're talking about. The same way, Stavrogin, when pressed by anybody, would say, I have no idea why Kirillov committed suicide. I have no idea why Shatov was killed. But the act of killing the enemy is important. I would say is seminal, even foundational, for the establishment of the group. So it's really shocking when you think about this. You have to kill in order to be member of our group. Did you know that Ceausescu himself killed in 1955 a few peasants in Vrancea County only because those peasants would not submit, would not become members of the collective, so to speak? Did you know that somebody like Fidel Castro or somebody like Ernesto Che Guevara would be ready to kill physically and personally the enemies of the people before they would be upgraded in the group, in the party? Did you know that Stalin himself, the brigand, so to speak, the gangster, Stalin himself, had to kill various people in 1907, 1910, as a member of the Tbilisi of the Georgian gang of gangsters. He had to kill. He was a mafioso, among many other things. Why? Because the blood, the innocent blood shed by others, would seal his sense of belonging to the group. So Dostoevsky was truly amazing, you know, just amazing. Just think about that. Who else in Europe was able to produce such a piece of writing? I have no idea, I'm telling you, but he did. So everything that you find in the book is now unfolding in Russia. Certainly that's the case. Now, if Stavrogin hanged himself, we shall see whether Putin will do that too. We don't know. We still have to wait. Any other question, guys? But thank you, George, and congratulations for your English. Very good. By the way, I have to be honest, yet again, we do this in English for one reason, for one good reason, because we want to practice English. We are not perfect. I'm not perfect in terms of speaking English, but I'm very much aware that without practicing, there's no way you can keep it up. There's no way you can improve your skills. And so let's do it just because it's a joy to always improve whatever skills. Troy, welcome back.
I apologize. I was in a loud place. I couldn't.
You need to eat.
Ah.
We want you to be well fed. So what do you think would happen to Putin?
You know, I'm almost scared to speculate. But as you said, these are the same decisions that people have been dealing for many years. But it's amazing. It's amazing how much insight we can receive by this discussion. I want to thank everyone. I want to thank everyone for speaking in English. I appreciate the stretch. I know it's difficult for some and more difficult for others, but I think you have a good purpose. I think you do a great service. And I've actually spoken with a few people who are very interested in joining us, but the logistics are a problem so far. And
yes,
you know, this is the issue, but we have a lot of interest. But yes, thank you so much. I hope everything is, we hear the news, you know, frankly, I get more news from you than I do from anywhere else.
Troy, just to mention this, I will be in Dallas on the 21st. I have a full day. It's a very busy day on the 21st of March. I'm supposed to speak to the Freedom First, I think it's called, or Liberty First Institute. And then on the 22nd, I have a gathering of Romanians. I have a meeting with some Romanians in a private setting. But on the 23rd, if you're more available.
Yes.
It's, I think, a Wednesday. On Wednesday, 23rd of March, we can get together.
Yes, that's perfect. I've returned to Texas on the 22nd in the evening, and I'll remain in Dallas until through the 23rd. So that's perfect.
Excellent.
I look forward.
I'm looking forward to. Absolutely.
All right. Excellent. We can get some details in the future, but it's a wonderful time. I think that it's going to work out.
Thank you.
Thank you for taking care of the world over there. I would say I haven't said that for a while.
I must say I'm very impressed with our lot, with the Romanians. We did not wait for any funds from the European Union in order to show solidarity with the Ukrainian refugees. There are many friends of mine who are personally involved in supporting these refugees. Some are members of this community, the Great Books community. And I know that on, I think, Friday, I have a number of friends visiting Chernăuți, going to Bukovina, that's Ukraine, northern part of Bukovina, where Eminescu, our greatest writer, spent his youth. And I know also that members of our community are very active in Tulcea County, in trying to support especially the mothers and the children who have left Ukraine. So thank you for encouraging us. And please, one last thing, do not start the Third World War, please. I mean, I'm talking to America right now.
I understand. No, I absolutely understand. I think we're all on the same page.
Absolutely. You know what? It's shocking. It's shocking. So you had Stalin, you had Truman, you had, of course, Reagan, you had Gorbachev, and there was no war between Russia and the USA. And we are right now that close. When Biden and Putin are in charge, we are so close to having a war between the two countries. So
I understand. I understand. It's ridiculous. You would think there would be, but I believe it's an interesting time we're living in.
Certainly. Well,
Most
thank
interesting.
you. Thank you, Troy. And
Yes.
guys, listen, we are trying to always keep this hour short, or like compact, if not short. So there's room for one last comment or one last, who knows, question from you. And by the way, I do appreciate, I must also say, I appreciate the fact that you stick to the routine. In such times of trouble, turmoil, it's so easy to be carried away with the bad news, with the catastrophic news, to have your entire sort of system derailed by the news, by the afflictions of others. But we have to stay strong, we have to stay on course, and we have to be always grounding ourselves in the word and in the great books, in the great tradition. Welcome, Sofia. Welcome, Camelia. Welcome, Viorica, Anka. Thank you very much. If you have no question to ask, then I will kindly invite Estera to have the final word for tonight.
Thank you, Mihai, for this presentation, and thank you for sticking to the routine also in these times. I just want to let you know about tomorrow evening. Tomorrow evening, we are going to have another Silver Business meeting. We are going to talk about Clausewitz and his book On the War,
yeah,
with Mihai. And then on Wednesday, we are going to have a new guest among us. It's Lavinia Bratu, biologist and psychiatrist from Timișoara, who is going to present us the book of Brené Brown, The Courage to be Vulnerable. So
the courage to be
vulnerable.
Vulnerable, okay.
Okay. And then on Thursday, those of you who are from Timișoara, you are all invited to come to the Arts Museum of Timișoara for our meeting, for our anniversary. In fact, we are going to have a big event, and we are going to have guests. Mihai will be there, and then Lavinia Tech will be there, and then Professor Arieșan and Professor Mesaros. So
we will celebrate a year of existence of the club, of the Great Books Club, and we thank you for that. And if you have friends in Timișoara, do let them know that we are going to be there. As I said, March the 10th, 6:30 p.m. and probably 200 people will attend the event. It's going to be broadcasted live, and we are also going to launch 2 books of mine. One is called Jesus at Nicaea. The second one is my PhD thesis published in English, Light from Light, Jesus Christ and the Monastic Experience of God. So you're all welcome, and good news will get to you very soon. and we are very, very grateful once again for your contribution. I wish you good night. Thank you, Sophia, for coming. It's a bit late, but we try to be on time. We started at 7:30. We should end right now. And thank you very much once again. God bless you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.